Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Classic Lit Storytime, where we discuss the dark side of human nature through the lens of literature. If you want to skip straight to the story, head to this timestamp, and if you would like to go straight to the commentary, head to this timestamp. So far, on our exploration of Notes from the Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky, we have explored themes like self-disgust, negativity bias, and especially we've looked at how the underground man's attitude and his approach to life seems to be feeding into an endless cycle that's stopping him from getting out of his funk, essentially. And Nietzsche has said before, don't stare too long into the abyss or the abyss will stare back at you. There are a lot of variations on quotes like this. It sounds like something that should be logically obvious. If you're unhappy, don't wallow in it. Think about something happy instead. But if you're in that state, actually trying to get out of it is not as simple as just, hey, turn that frown upside down. There's a lot more to it than that. And I think it's very interesting to think about how fine a line there is between processing your emotions healthily, in a healthy way, and repressing them, because you have to get the timing just right. It's a little Goldilocks kind of thing. You have a bad experience, the worst thing you can do is to pretend you don't have a negative feeling about it, to push it aside and, oh no, I'm absolutely fine. That way things always come back and hit you in the head. But at the same time, you can't get stuck in your feelings. And for some people, it's a lot harder to do that, I think. I think some people have maybe a gloomier personality, or they're more prone to depression. I talked about Trent Reznor in a short recently. His brain chemistry is such a way that he errs towards the depressive. And someone like the underground man certainly seems to have that kind of proclivity as well. But the really interesting thing about someone like Trent Reznor, or say Leonard Cohen, or Cat Power, or these other amazing artists who are known for their sadness, actually they aren't wallowing, they're not inert because of these challenging feelings they're having. They're channeling them into something creative, giving themselves an outlet and allowing themselves to get something positive out of these negative emotions. And I think Dostoevsky's overarching message is that we need to try and seek things that make us happy when we're not so happy. And having been in a Siberian labor camp and having had epilepsy and generally having a pretty difficult time, I think it's clear to see that he has some experience on the matter of struggle and how to overcome it and how to retain your humanity and your compassion and your love despite going through these difficult things. Without further ado, let's start reading chapter 3 of Notes from the Underground. With people who know how to revenge themselves and to stand up for themselves in general, how is it done? Why, when they are possessed, let us suppose, by the feeling of revenge, then for the time there is nothing else but that feeling left in their whole being, such a gentleman simply dashes straight for his object like an infuriated bull with its horns down, and nothing but a wall will stop him. By the way, facing the wall, such gentlemen, that is, the direct persons and men of action, are genuinely nonplussed. For them, a wall is not an evasion. As for us people who think and consequently do nothing, it is not an excuse for turning aside, an excuse for which we are always very glad, though we scarcely believe in it ourselves, as a rule. No, they are nonplussed in all sincerity. The wall has for them something tranquilizing, morally soothing, final, maybe even something mysterious. But of the wall later. Well, such a direct person I regard as the real normal man. as his tender mother nature wished to see him when she graciously brought him into being on the earth. I envy such a man till I am green in the face. He is stupid. I am not disputing that, but perhaps the normal man should be stupid. How do you know? Perhaps it is very beautiful. And I am more persuaded of that suspicion, if one can call it so, by the fact that if you take, for instance, the antithesis of the normal man, that is, the acute man of acute consciousness, who has come, of course, not out of the lap of nature, but out of a retort. This is almost mysticism, gentlemen, but I suspect this too. This retort-made man is sometimes so nonplussed in the presence of his antithesis that with all of his exaggerated consciousness, he genuinely thinks of himself as a mouse and not a man. It may be an acutely conscious mouse, yet it is a mouse, while the other man is a man, and therefore, etc., etc. And the worst of it is, he himself, his very own self, looks on himself as a mouse. No one asked him to do so, and that is an important point. Now, let us look at this mouse in action. Let us suppose, for instance, that it feels insulted too, and it almost always does feel insulted, and wants to revenge itself. There may even be a greater accumulation in him than l'homme de nature et de la vérité. Sorry, French people. The base and nasty desire to vent that spite on its assailant rankles perhaps even more nastily than in l'homme de la nature et de la vérité, a man of nature and truth, if you wanted to know. The base and nasty desire to vent that spite, for through his innate stupidity, the latter looks upon his revenge as justice, pure and simple, while in the consequence of his acute consciousness, the mouse does not believe in the justice of it. To come, at last, to the deed itself, to the very act of revenge, apart from one fundamental nastiness, the luckless mouse succeeds in creating around it so much other nastiness in the form of doubts and questions, adds to the one question so many unsettled questions, that there inevitably works up around it a sort of fatal brew, a stinking mess made up of its doubts, emotions, and of the contempt spat upon it by the direct man of action, who stands solemnly about it as judges and arbiters, laughing at it till their healthy sides ache. Of course, the only thing left for it is to dismiss all that with a wave of its paw, and with a smile of assumed contempt in which it doesn't even itself believe, creep ignominiously back into its mouse hole. There in its nasty, stinking, underground home, our insulated, crushed, and ridiculed mouse promptly becomes absorbed in cold, malignant, and above all, everlasting spite. For 40 years together, it every time will add to itself details still more ignominious details, and every time more spitefully teasing and tormenting itself with its own imagination. It will itself be ashamed of its imaginings, but yet it will recall it all. It will go over and over every detail. It will invent unheard of things against itself, pretending that those things might happen, and will forgive nothing. Maybe it will begin to revenge itself too, but as it were piecemeal, in trivial ways, from behind the stove, incognito, without ever believing either in its own right to vengeance or in the success of its revenge, knowing that from all its efforts at revenge, it will suffer 100 times more than he on whom it revenges itself, while he, I dare say, will not even scratch himself. On its deathbed, it will recall it all over again, with interest accumulated all over the years, but it is just in that cold, abominable half despair, half belief, in that conscious burying oneself alive for grief in the underworld for 40 years, in that acutely recognised and yet partly doubtful hopelessness of one's position, in that hell of unsatisfied desires turned inward, in that fever of oscillations, of resolutions determined forever and repented of a minute later. That the saviour of that strange enjoyment of which I have spoken lies, it is so subtle, so difficult of analysis that persons who are a little limited, or even simply persons of strong nerves, will not understand a single atom of it. Possibly, you will add to your own account with the grim, people will not understand it either who have never received a slap in the face. And in that way you will politely hint to me that I too perhaps have had the experience of a slap in the face in my life, and so I speak as one who knows. I bet you are thinking that. But set your minds at rest, gentlemen. I have not received a slap in the face, though it is absolutely a matter of indifference to me what you say or think about it. Possibly I even regret myself. But set your minds at rest, gentlemen. I have not received a slap in the face, though it is absolutely a matter of indifference to me what you may think about it. Possibly, I even regret myself that I have given so few slaps in the face during my life, but enough. Not another word on that subject of such extreme interest to you. I will continue calmly concerning persons with strong nerves who do not understand a certain refinement of enjoyment, though in certain circumstances these gentlemen bellow their loudest like bulls, though this, let us suppose, does them the greatest credit. Yet, as I have said already, the stone wall. What stone wall? Why, of course, the laws of nature, the deductions of natural science, mathematics. As soon as they prove to you, for instance, that you are descended from a monkey, then it is no use scowling. Accept it for a fact. When they prove to you that in reality one drop of your own fat must be dearer to you than 100,000 of your fellow creatures, and that this conclusion is the final solution of all so-called virtues and duties and all such prejudices and fancies, then you have to just accept it. There is no help for it, for twice two is a law of mathematics. Just try refuting it. Upon my word, they will shout at you. There is no use protesting. It is a case of twice two makes four. Nature does not ask your permission. She has nothing to do with your wishes, and whether you like her laws or dislike them, you are bound to accept her as she is, and consequently all her conclusions. A wall, you see, is a wall, and so on and so on. Merciful heavens! But what do I care for the laws of nature and arithmetic, when for some reason I dislike those laws, and the fact that twice two makes four? Of course I cannot break through the wall by battering my head against it, if I really have not got the strength to knock it down, but I am not going to be reconciled to it simply because it is a stone wall and I haven't got the strength. As though such a stone wall really were a consolation, and really did contain some word of consolation. As though such a stone wall really were a consolation, and really did contain some word of conciliation, simply because it is as true as twice two makes four. Oh, absurdity of absurdities! How much better is it to understand it all, to recognise it all the impossibilities in the stone wall, not to be reconciled to one of those impossibilities and stone walls if it disgusts you to be reconciled by it, by the way of the most inevitable, logical combinations, to reach the most revolting conclusions on the everlasting theme that even for the stone wall you are somehow yourself to blame, though again it is as clear as day you are not to blame in the least, and therefore grinding your teeth in silent impotence to sink into luxurious inertia, brooding on the fact that there is no one even for you to feel vindictive against, that you have not, and perhaps never will have, an object for your spite, that it is sleight of hand, a bit of juggling, a card sharper's trick, that it is simply a mess. No knowing what, and no knowing who, but in spite of all these uncertainties and jugglings, there is still an ache in you, and the more you do not know, the worse the ache. And so ends chapter 3. Time for tea! Cheers. Right, well, tea poured. I hope you got one for yourself. This week I am having Apple Loves Mint. It is, believe it or not, a mixture of apple and mint, and it is really, really gorgeous. Really delicious. So, chapter 3 of Notes from the Underground is fascinating, it's bitter, it's enthralling. It makes me feel a lot of things. It makes me feel surprised that things haven't really changed that much, I suppose. I think it's very interesting to hear a sort of, he's kind of like a doomer, isn't he? Like, so bitter at people who are healthy and men of action. And you just think, well, hang on, maybe if you stopped being so angry at these men of action and people who get things done, who you are so envious of that you're green in the face, maybe if you stopped being bitter at them, Mr. Underground Man, then you wouldn't have the problems that you have. But he is wallowing in his own rancor. He is aware that he is wallowing in his own rancor. And as long as he gets that perverse pleasure in self-destructing, he's never going to get out of it. And I think there is a really interesting irony in that, I mean, technically this is written as a journal, as an outpouring. And I think if the Underground Man in fact did write out his feelings in this way and process them as Dostoevsky has, he would stand a chance of overcoming his problems. You know, if the narrator himself has written this, then he has become a man of action. And that, I think, is quite a beautiful thing. And I think, you know, again, I'm talking about that fine line between processing and wallowing. I think it's really good to look at artists who do on the sadder side. People like Radiohead or people like Lana Del Rey who look at the darker side of life. It's easy to look at them and dismiss them and say, well, they're wallowing in sadness, and listening to them, that's wallowing in sadness. But it's actually the complete opposite, because they are giving people, well, for themselves, it's an outlet, a creative outlet for their negative or difficult emotions or their sad feelings. But also, it gives people who can identify with their music something that resonates. And I think that's what Dostoevsky was going for here. I think he was hoping that people who maybe have traits of the Underground Man, obviously who aren't as, you know, fully blown misanthropic as he is, but, you know, maybe will see themselves in him and seek to become more of a person of action. And I think that's what a lot of artists do as well. I think we see this concept of being self-defeating in a lot of art as well. A really modern example, the most current example, modern, it's not quite current, example I can think of is in Succession, where you see the Roy siblings who are billionaires. They have absolutely everything that people think they could ever dream of, but they didn't get a proper, well-rounded childhood with love from their caregivers. And Succession is amazing for showing how it doesn't matter how much money or material wealth you have, if you didn't get that well-rounded upbringing with the right balance of love and discipline and kindness and nurture and boundaries and all of those things that go into making a great childhood, you're not going to be able to live in a way that is in accordance with what you want to do. You know, you see it very strongly in Roman. The Underground Man, he might enjoy getting locked in Jerry's hotel bathroom and having her berate him. From the sound of it, he can't stop insulting himself, and he openly says, yeah, I get pleasure, I enjoy it, I like thinking about myself as a rotten scoundrel, because that way you don't have to make the effort to not be a rotten scoundrel anymore. You can actually find comfort and happiness and familiarity in being the same and reinforcing your own negative behavior until you're blue in the face. You can live your whole life like that. But I think what Dostoevsky is showing through The Underground Man is that there is just a terrible tragedy in being your own worst enemy. There is a terrible sadness because it's all hyperbole, everything is amplified. Although you do hear people, plenty of people, they just moan, and you hear all they do is moan and they're unhappy, and you think, well, probably if you moaned less, you would be more happy. But there's something in that feeling of being stuck in sadness, of seeing through the veil of happiness, I guess, that everyone wears. Oh, everyone is just living in a false world, and I see the real truth. People find a real comfort in that, and the Underground Man is willing to sacrifice pretty much everything just so he can hold on to his horrific opinion of himself and of everyone else. And I think another really interesting thing with chapter 3, with this chapter we've just seen, is him talking a lot. He talks a lot about 2 + 2 is 4, and we have these laws of nature, and we have mathematics, and we just have to accept all of this. And I think for someone, we've not been, largely agricultural and rural for 200 years now. We've been industrialized. This was written right at the beginning of industrialization, and in the grand scheme of things, it's not really a long time. It's not that long, but you can just tell that there is some truth and some validity in what the Underground Man is saying here about how suddenly we've had all of these laws and all of these restrictions and rules put on us for our own protection and for our own benefit. But is that nature? Is that truly human nature? Or are we just in this big civilization experiment and people are just making the rules up as they go along? And I think obviously, that is what we're looking at, because the concept of rationalism and the concept of absolutism is clearly absurd now. We can see what was deemed rational 100 years ago. A lot of that is not rational anymore. Our concept of rationality and right and wrong is always changing, and having these rigid rules and structures and authority and being told from a very young age that things are a certain way, things must be in their place, and that's all there is to it, is not very realistic. I'm sure it merges well with some people's natural personality, but for many of us, we're messy, we're part of the animal kingdom. We've just developed extremely sophisticated societies, and I think we're in a great place now in the world, in that there is freedom for us to find things that we love to do. And I wish the Underground Man, heck, I even wish the Underground Man had read it, because he would have such a good time on there. I wish he had something to vent and something to channel his negativity into, if in fact he did not write this out as a novel and this is just more of a snapshot. But I get the impression it's presented as something that he has written. So well done, Underground Man, for finding the thing that let you channel your emotions and stop ruminating round and round and round in the same, the same old miserable thoughts. Right, that is me done for chapter 3. I will come back with hello. Yes. I don't know if they'll be able to see you. No. You're saying hello. This is Polly. You say hello this way. Yeah, good girl. Yes, what a beautiful voice. What were your thoughts on the chapter? Well, thank you for coming and visiting and for saying goodbye. Yes. I hope you've had a lovely weekend, and please subscribe now. Tell your literature-loving friends to come and join us, be part of this lovely movement where we talk about words and how cool it is to think about being human. That was just off the cuff. I don't know if you realised that. You probably thought it was rehearsed, but it was off the cuff. Thank you so much for watching today. Like, subscribe, comment. I would love to hear what you think about chapter 3, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on the themes that we've discussed today. I hope you have a wonderful week, and I love you loads. Mwah. Bye. Bye. Say bye. Bye.